This is the reason people, they don't just dislike the press, they despise the press. And this kind of contemptuous and condescending story on the part of Time magazine is at the zenith of what people are disgusted by. They don't get it. People are supporting Donald Trump not because he's going to go and kowtow to Washington, is because he's going to go and he's going to disrupt it. And it is long past since needing a major disruption.
As only he can, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee slamming Time magazine over an article called Trump's War on Washington. There's the cover. The piece inside argues that the president's teardown of Washington bureaucracy could come at the expense of democracy. To talk about it, syndicated radio host Leslie Marshall and former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown, both Fox News contributors, and we're glad to have you here. Happy Friday.
Good morning.
Hey, happy Friday.
All right, Scott, I get that Mr. Trump's changing of Washington could come at the expense of a whole lot of federal jobs and perhaps some federal bureaucracy, but at the expense of democracy?
Yeah, listen, you got to love Governor Huckabee. He's always spot on, especially when it comes to this sort of thing. There's no secret that Washington is in a bubble. Many of the elected officials are in, you know, they've been there for so long, decades, 30, 40, 50 years in some instances. They have a very cozy relationship with K Street and the folks that have been so-called establishment in Washington. A threat to democracy? No. A threat to the establishment and the way that they've been doing things for generations almost? Yeah, absolutely. That's why he was sent to Washington, to be that change maker. That's why I voted for him and support him, because I want him to go down there and knock some heads and kick some butts. I mean, pretty simple.
Well, you make a good point. He's doing exactly what he said he was going to do to that end, Leslie, and it seems as though that's why the voters put him there.
Well, actually, a lot of Trump supporters are changing their support of people who voted for Trump because, you know, some of them will say, hey, I voted for you to create jobs, but I didn't vote for you to reduce the Coast Guard or to dismiss or to reduce FEMA funding or to reduce other federal programs that many in the United States benefit from.
You just said, Leslie, create jobs. February's job numbers came in today, 235,000 jobs. Unemployment rate now down to 4.7%. And for the record, the Dow's loving it in the most construction jobs in a decade. So where is your proof now, as the Dow's up 35, where's your proof now that there's a lot of people who are saying now that they're not happy with him?
Leland, you know what I find funny is when I look back historically, and, you know, math is math, whether a president is a Democrat or Republican, usually their first quarter, you have to look to their predecessor for credit or blame, whether it's jobs or whether it's a robust economy. Now, certainly Wall Street is happier with Donald Trump as they usually are with a Republican in the White House. But quite frankly, you can't say that, you know, you can't credit everything that's happening with the reduction in unemployment and the job gains to Donald Trump right now because it's too early. And I would say that if Donald Trump were a Democrat as well.
I think it was President Obama who blamed President Bush for all 8 years, Scott, if our memory serves. Yeah. Get back to this Time magazine piece, though. Important to sort of drill down on what Time magazine is saying. Here's a pullout from the article itself. Trump is rallying his political base against the federal agencies he oversees, thus partnering his presidency with a radical fringe. Win or lose, the standoff he has engineered will diminish the credibility of the government. And Leslie, if you unpack this, it seems to mean that anyone who wants to reduce the size of federal government is somehow a radical fringe. Is that fair?
Well, I think it's one interpretation. That's not how I read it or how I see it. To Governor Huckabee's point, the country is very split. I mean, you know, approximately half support what the president is doing. Approximately half of the 46% that voted in this past election support him and those policies, but half don't. And one of the things about a Time magazine or, you know, any magazine is part of our First Amendment is people can opine, and they can opine based on their opinion for or against our president. One of the things that makes our country great. When you look at some agencies, for example, like FEMA, like I mentioned earlier, there are some great concerns when we have more tornadoes, more earthquakes, and more flooding on record over the past decade, and people are concerned about that, those fundings. When we look at just what, you know, happened in Jersey just a couple of years years ago. So I think there is some merit to that idea that it's not the dismantling of the federal government. Some of the freedoms people see when they see maybe reporters being kept out or being escorted out. There are a lot of things not just being different and draining the swamp, but people that are concerned about their constitutional rights being trampled on.
We're now mixing so many situations, Scott. But it's some level sort of back to this idea of the media taking on Donald Trump and Donald Trump's supporters, yourself included, hitting back at what you could conceivably call the mainstream media. Are we finally sort of seeing laid bare the internal prejudices, if you will, of folks like Time Magazine, of Newsweek, of the New York Times, as they are now, at one point 6 months ago, cheerleaders for one administration, and now are doubling down on really taking to task the next administration? The only thing that changed was the party that was in control.
Sure. Listen, there's no secret that there's a media bias. I see it, you see it, the American people see it without even blinking. You can tell by the Time Magazine and a whole host of other publications the way that they're just, continuously attacking, not really covering a lot of the good things that are happening. For example, yesterday, Ivanka Trump and Melania Trump's efforts in dealing with women's, respecting the women's rights and the women role of women in our society. But you're looking, we have to get back to reality. Talking about cutting federal spending, are you kidding me? They're like drunken sailors, pigs at a trough. You give them more, they'll spend more. We're in $20 trillion and rising of national debt. We're running upwards of $1 trillion deficits every year. We have to do something, and there's a tremendous amount of overlap, fraud, waste, and abuse, and I commend him, and so do the American people, for giving me a good value for our dollar, and it's about time.
Scott, Leslie, you guys will understand this. We got to run. Great conversation. I'm sure it will continue. It will continue over dining room tables tonight. Take care, guys. Great weekend.
Thank you.